everyone, and welcome to another Zoom into Books presentation affiliated with the Headline Books Christmas Extravaganza. Tonight is Thriller Night, and we have guest interviewer Rick Robinson with us, along with several award-winning Headline Books authors, including Rick himself is an award-winning Headline Books author. We're also joined by Don Stansberry, Eliot Parker, Dennis Hetzel, and Joel Burcat. So we are really excited about this fun panel discussion that we're going to have this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Rick Robinson. If any of you guys have questions for any of our panelists, feel free to type them into the comments section. Thanks so much for joining us, guys.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that kind introduction. You know, I've been with Headline Books now since, I guess we're going to do the beginning and the end of this. I think Don Stansberry and I have both been with Headline Books now since about 2009. I'm not sure. I'm saying that he came first, so I'm saying that he's the dean. We're going to save him for last. And also, he's got my book on the shelf behind him, so he gets a little extra time. But this is something that we wanted to put on this year. We're normally in this time of year, we're going around and we're hitting different shows. We're going different places. The authors are going around to bookstores and signing books because, you know, nothing says I love you like an autographed book from one of these folks right here. That's what you want at Christmas, at the holidays, Hanukkah, any of the holidays coming along. Yeah, you want that autographed book from these folks who we're going to be talking with today. And I'll tell you what we can do is, as you take a look at this, as you go through this, you hear about these stories, you hear about what they're talking about. The one thing I want to remind you is that you can go to Headline Books and you can purchase a book which will come to you autographed for Christmas time, for the holidays, for that special person. And again, nothing says I love you like an autographed Headline Books thriller. I'm going to start out here first with a dear friend of mine and somebody who actually I helped co-write a book with. Dennis Hetzel is going to be up first. And what we're going to do with these authors is ask them, each one of them, to do a little reading from their books and have a little bit of a discussion with them. Now, Dennis is got a great background in writing. Dennis, I would say, of all of us that you see across the panel or that you see they're going to be talking today, out of all of them, Dennis has probably put more words on paper than any of us. That's because he has a lifetime as a reporter. Started out in Chicago, where he's from. Chicago plays prominently in his thriller books. He was the editor of the paper in York, Pennsylvania. He and I got to know each other when he was the editor of the Cincinnati and Kentucky Enquirer, and we've also played in a band together. So with all of that, Dennis, I'm going to let you jump in there first. And what are we reading from today? Are we reading Season of Lies, or are we reading Killing the Curse?
We're going to do a reading from Season of Lies. And, you know, my joke line, Rick, is all the years I was a journalist, it's not actually that much of a joke now. I was accused of writing fiction a few times, but I didn't actually do it on purpose, at least as far as I know, until I wrote my 2 books for Kathy and Headline Books.
So these books are not fake news?
These are not fake news.
Okay, there we go.
When you write political thrillers, it's kind of hard to make stuff up that's any crazier than the real life. I need a little bit of setup for this. And this is going to be a reading, since it's a thriller night, that might surprise a couple people in terms of what I picked to read. In Season of Lies, the president is a diehard Chicago Cubs fan. It's the book is actually follows the story that starts in Killing the Curse, and he's running for re-election. He's kind of the moderate Republican. If I can be political for a second, I wish I had had a choice to vote for a couple of times. And it's going to be a 3-party race. All kinds of crazy stuff is going on. The president has a lot of redeeming qualities, but he's also very self-absorbed, like a lot of political figures, a lot of leaders, pretty full of himself. He is very good at, forgiving himself for his actions, and the strain of everything is putting a major strain on his marriage. And I picked a scene that's a small, intimate scene between him and his wife in the kitchen in the White House. It's not a classic thriller scene, and I picked it because I found in talking to book clubs and people for the first 2 books that it's these small moments in books, once you get past the action and the kind of energizing plot events that all of us here like to do. It's the small moments that people come back and are kind of memorable. So I'm going to give you a reading with Luke Murphy, who's the president, and his wife Allison in the kitchen in the White House, trying to make sense of everything that's going on. This comet in the shape of a cross has crossed the sky, setting off all sorts of religious fervor. He's facing re-election. He's facing scandals. It involves the Chicago Cubs. Their star pitchers endorsed him. You've got the politics of destruction, trying to destroy this guy's career as well as the president. So here's the scene. Allison Murphy already was sitting at the small table in the casual private dining area in the family kitchen of the residence area on the second floor of the White House. She took a triangle of pita bread from a basket and stabbed one end into a shallow bowl of red pepper hummus before turning her attention to one of the two Greek salads on the table. "Do you want my olives?" Murphy said in a monotone, eyeing his salad while pointing to 4 fat black olives that formed the corners of a square surrounding an impressive amount of feta cheese. "The chefs know I love feta, and they know I hate olives, but I like to share them with you because you love olives. Sometimes I wonder how the heck they know all this stuff." "Sure," she said, "toss them over." Luke took his seat and shared the olives. The couple ate quietly for several minutes. The only noise came from Fox News at low volume on a small flat-screen television under a nearby counter. Several talking heads shared meaningless chatter about Lydia Nick's announcement before dissecting Luke Murphy's presidency. "Luke, do you mind turning that off? I'm sure you're not hearing anything you don't know already, and we need to talk," Allison said. "It's taken me a long time to get my head together on what I want to say. A quiet lunch in the kitchen is the best place to get your attention." "Sure," Luke said. As he switched off the television, he added, "I don't have a lot of time before my next meeting, but they gave me 15 minutes more than usual for a private lunch. When you said you wanted to talk, I figured something was up." "Well, that was very thoughtful of you," she said, trying to control a flare of frustration and temper. "Sarcasm doesn't suit you, Allison," Luke said. "It doesn't suit you to act like you're doing me a big favor by giving me 15 more minutes, Allison responded. "This is exactly what we need to be talking about." "You asked for the lunch," he said, his voice turning colder. "Let's not start with a fight." "Luke, this is bull. Our marriage is nothing. Our relationship is nothing." "Is this about no children again?" Luke said, staring down at his hand, suddenly finding it to be a fascinating object of interest. "Luke, look at me like I matter," she said, raising her voice. "That's more crap. We agreed about that a long time ago. We enjoy my nieces and nephews. They pose for pictures for the press even. We talked publicly about my quote-unquote difficulty in having children because, my goodness, the American people expect their first couples to have beautiful children. It's fine. It worked for both of us, for both of our careers." Now Luke felt defensive. "Look, I know I'm kind of distant, but cut me some slack here. I don't like to play the president card, but, it's a pretty hard job." "I realize that," she said, her tone getting icier. "But we're not partners now in any sense of the word, not physically, not emotionally, and not intellectually. Aren't we supposed to make each other laugh out loud every now and then? Aren't we supposed to be interested in what the other person has to say or what the other person thinks, at least sometimes?" "I think you're being pretty dramatic," Luke said, "and I think you have an idealized view of what most marriages are like, but okay, I get it. I'll try to be more attentive. Really." "Luke, you're not listening," Allison said. Now Luke could see a tear in the corner of her eye. She wiped it away and her voice regained firmness. "What did I just say? Did I say I want to live in fantasy land? No. I said we should genuinely want to enjoy each other's company now and then. The point is you're offering to be more attentive, but you really don't want to be more attentive. So no, I'm not asking too much from the person who's supposed to be my life partner. I'm not an appendage. I'm tired of pretending to be your happy girl buddy. So here it is," she continued. She knew at that moment she was finally ready to say what she came to say. "We got too much invested in each other for me to just walk. And I still care about you, I really do. I'll stick it out for your re-election, but here's what's going to happen. Once you're safely in your second term, we're separating. I just can't do this for 4 more years, but I'll give you another 12 months. "Wow, you've really been saving this up." "I don't know what else to say," Luke said, buying time to think and trying to hold back his flaring temper. He didn't need this, another big complication. It would be a field day for his opponents and probably late-night comedians, too. Then he caught himself, knowing that, as usual, his first thought was a selfish one, how it would affect him. Maybe he really wasn't meant to be married. Old memories flooded forward, and he pushed them back into the box where he usually could keep such thoughts locked. He wanted to share something about his deeper feelings with Allison, but as usual, he couldn't do it. I had no idea things were that bad. Well, other than the bedroom department, it's the stress, I think, was all he could offer his wife of 25 years. Luke, this isn't about whether your Viagra is working, Allison said. Maybe it'll be a relief to know we're on our last laps. Maybe without the pressure, we can be friends again. Maybe I can help you more than just by smiling and waving at crowds and letting everyone dissect my wardrobe after steak dinners. No one can catch a whiff of this, Luke Murphy said, not a whiff. Yeah, Luke, I figured that would be your priority, she said with a tone of flatness. Don't worry. As usual, the people around you won't let you down, so you can do great things for America. She left the room. The President of the United States stared at the door as it closed behind him, turned the television back on, picked up a triangle of pita bread and mimicked the way his wife stabbed the hummus. He noticed she had never eaten the olives from his plate. And that's the reading. That section also is foreshadowing for a scandal about Luke's college days that comes out later in the book.
You know, Dennis, the one thing before I jump here to Eliot, the one thing that comes through to me in your books is really the Chicago background. I mean, Luke Murphy is from Chicago, and your background, you're growing up in that area, your knowledge of that area really comes through in both of the books. Does that reach beyond? I mean, to me, it reaches it reaches into the characters and reaches beyond just the geographical notice. It really grabs to people and tells them a little bit more about where these folks are from and what they're about.
Well, you always want to have a sense of place, a sense of authenticity, and for readers who aren't, from whatever you're writing, wherever you're writing about, you want them to, kind of get into the feel and sense of the place. So, I heard Steve Barry, the great thriller author speak a few years ago, and he said an interesting thing. He said it's write about what you know for sure, and I know about Chicago, but also write about what you're passionate about. And so I wrote about politics, sports, and Chicago. But I found the more I write, the more I like the small moments in the books and the relationships between the characters. They just become more important to me the more I write.
And that really, I think, runs true with the reader, because the reader wants to identify with the person. And the next person up, Eliot Parker. Eliot has kind of a unique background on what he's doing, because Eliot starts out over in, and still has a podcast right on Appalachia, as I know. He starts, and he goes. I have something in common with everybody here tonight. First, I play music with Dennis. Eliot, you and I went to the Big E, Eastern Kentucky University. There, go Big E. Then he wanders a little bit further west to Murray State University, gets his master's there. Now he's over in Oxford, Mississippi. So he just keeps wandering over further towards the left coast. I'm not sure if an Appalachian fella is going to make his way to Los Angeles eventually or what, but he seems to be moving across the country as we go. Eliot, welcome to Zoom into Books. What do you have for us tonight?
Hey, Rick, thank you so much for having me, and thanks so much to Headline Books for including me in this panel. I'm going to read an excerpt from one of the early chapters of my book called A Knife's Edge, which is a story that follows a Charleston, West Virginia police detective named Ronan McCullough. And this is a sequel to the first book in that series called Fragile Brilliance. And I set this in Charleston, West Virginia, where I grew up. And I know a lot of you all know where that is, and some folks that are watching with us on Facebook Live may know where that is. But, I've written a lot about Appalachia and set a lot of my stories and novels kind of in those areas, but I'd never written about the place I actually grew up. So it was a lot of fun to set a story, a fictionalized story about a set of characters in my hometown. And so basically what happens in A Knife's Edge, and the portion that I'm going to read here in just a minute, comes from early in the book. And Ronan is at a party at a building called the Clay Center, which is in downtown Charleston, and he's there to kind of provides security. He's there. If you've ever been to a big party or a big event, you oftentimes will see off-duty police officers and sometimes uniformed police officers there to provide extra security for the patrons that are at the facility, and that's basically what Ronan is doing here. But what happens as we enter this chapter is, as he was providing security, someone launched a Hummer vehicle through one of the big glass windows there, right into the middle of the event. And so, the explosions and the crashes have happened. Things are on fire, and Ronan is just kind of waking up to try to make sense of what's going on. And he's looking for someone too. He's looking for Ty, and you'll hear a little bit about who Ty is and why Ronan's looking for him in just a minute, because he was also at the party. So this comes from chapter 3. Ronan opened one eye. The thick haze of fractured debris made his eyes burn. He spat, trying to clear the dust from his nose and throat. He wiped the back of his uniform sleeve across his eyes and blinked twice. When the scene became clear, he found the room had been reduced to rubble by the impact. A smoldering, jagged hole had ruptured the skin of the building like a busted pipe. Ronan stared at the ceiling. The force of the collision had buckled the outer wall of the clay center, and the spiral metal staircase had collapsed when the roof partially caved in on it. Sore but unhurt, Ronan noted the thin streams of blood on his hand. Instinctively, he drew it closer. He felt warm tingling on his forehead. With the other hand, Ronan touched the area. A fresh speck of blood coated his fingertips. He began quizzing himself silently. He was able to recall his name, where he lived, and his birth date. Although not exact, the impromptu assessment told him that he did not have a concussion. Ronan pulled himself up to a seated position. The atrium smelled of sulfur. Flecks of ruptured electrical wiring hung loosely from the ceiling and surrounding walls. Ronan could hear the pained groans of people around him. From across the room, a woman screamed, causing others around her to start trying to move. Then it clicked. Ty. Ronan called out his name. He heard nothing but the dull buzzing of the bent street light that had been plowed over by the collision and now hung at an odd angle like a bowed tree. Ronan called out for Ty again. The screams from the woman across the room subsided, and she started begging for help. In moments of chaos and disaster, Ronan knew to focus on one task at a time. The first order he gave himself was finding Ty. Ronan pulled himself to his feet. His vision blurred for a moment as a wave of dizziness overcame him. He closed his eyes for a second, held his breath, and waited for the blood in his head to equalize. Luckily, it worked. Now clear-headed, Ronan looked around him. The scene resembled a war zone. Tables had been overturned. The dais at the front of the room had been pushed back and shattered into the wall. Bricks and mortar speckled the floor. Dust was everywhere, clouding the air. Many of the guests were seriously injured. The buffet table that hugged the wall in front of Ronan before the collision had been smashed. Food lay scattered across the room in colored clumps. Ronan took inventory of the damage. Near the far end of the buffet line, Ronan saw the man that had pointed into the plaza outside. He lay on one side, bent at his waist, with a large column of bricks and steel piled onto him. Ronan raced over and lifted some of the bricks from his body and pulled back what pieces of steel he could grab. Ronan winced as a jagged piece of steel cut his finger, trickling a new stream of blood over his hand. Despite Ronan's removing the excessive weight, the man did not move. After a few more seconds, Ronan was able to see the man's face. It was badly smashed, and the bones in his face had shattered like glass. Ronan reached down and placed 2 fingers on his neck. There was no pulse, and his skin felt cold. He was dead. This was the first discovered casualty. There would be more. Through the distance, Ronan saw a figure move towards him. His instincts kicked in. Ronan loosened his Glock from his holster and gripped the handle tightly. The shadow moved awkwardly, then stopped. Ronan squinted, trying to make sense of the movement. Finally, he recognized the framed taut shape. Ronan raced to the shadow. It was Ty. Upon seeing Ronan, Ty collapsed into him. Ronan wrapped his arms around Ty and pulled him close. He could feel his boyfriend trembling, but Ty grabbed Ronan so hard he nearly lost his breath. A few moments passed. Ronan pushed back against the embrace. Ty let go, and Ronan stared down at him. Ty had 2 open forehead wounds and a deep cut on his cheek. A thin layer of dust covered the black portions of his tuxedo. He looked like he'd been rolled in flour. Ty wobbled for a moment under his own weight. Finally becoming stabilized, his eyes moved around the room for a moment before settling on Ronan. Ty? I'm okay. I'm not hurt, just a little dazed. When you slung me across the room, I was able to hide behind a support beam when the collision happened. Hearing that made Ronan nearly leap with joy. He embraced his partner again. The strength of the embrace was just as firm as before. Ty, I need to go. Ty swiveled his head emphatically from side to side. No. Ronan broke from the embrace and tried to step away. Ty reached for Ronan's utility belt and pulled. The force stopped his progress, but the belt buckle snapped and the belt slipped. No, Ronan. Ronan spun around Ty and was looking at him earnestly, his face knit with worry. Please don't go. Something else may happen. Ty, I need to... wait, this could be just the first part. What if another collision is coming? What if this is only the beginning of something worse? What if someone is coming to kill the rest of us? I want to stay with you. Ronan placed his hands on Ty's shoulders. Ty, listen to me. There are a lot of badly injured people here, and they need our help. Braxton Campbell is here, so is the mayor. They could need treatment. Ronan brushed back a thick strand of hair that hung across his face. I'm right here, but these people need care, and I need to find out what happened. Find someone who has a cell phone. Call 911. Do what you can. Before Ty could object further, a woman screamed out, please, please help me. My husband, he's not breathing. He's not moving. Ty heard the screeching pleas and looked one more time at Ronan. And I'll stop right there. So that just comes from...
I'm waiting to see what happened next, Eliot. I'm going to get the book and see what goes on next. Hey, I got a question for you. I mean, this is... You do your podcast, I know, on Appalachian books and writers and literatures. And for me, one of the great influences in my life was Jesse Stewart. Now, we don't write in the... I have written two literary novels where I got this idea of writing when I was 17 years old when I got to meet the old man. And I forever, in my two books, Alligator Alley and The Promise of Cedar Key, are based upon the things that I had read and how he had done. I mean, Jesse Stewart wrote the great American novel, was the voice of Appalachia. They called him the mountain laureate of the United States. Was it easy for you? Because I had a little bit, I struggled with this a little bit going from, did you have an influence like Jesse Stewart? Because I'm interested about this whole podcast that you do for Appalachian writers. Were you influenced by some people like Jesse Stewart early that did literary stuff? And if so, how did you turn that into the thriller side?
Oh yeah, loved Jesse Stewart, loved Wendell Berry. So many great Kentucky writers that I'd read. I'd really gotten interested in Appalachian writing for a class I took as an undergraduate. I went to Marshall University as an undergraduate, and I was a journalism major, but we had to take a lot of English classes. And I took an Appalachian fiction and poetry class. And in that class, we read Jesse Stewart. We read Wendell Berry. We read Denise Giardina. We read so many of the Harriet Arno, who wrote The Dollmaker, which is a wonderful book. We read so many wonderful authors that, I grew up in Appalachia, kind of knew what Appalachia was, but had no idea that our region was so rich with Appalachian writers and the talent and the work that was coming out of that had been coming out. And I think if you look today, and going back to your question, Rick, about the podcast, I think one of the reasons that I wanted to focus on Appalachia is because we have so many outstanding writers that are writing from Appalachia. And when I started to make that shift from, kind of the Giardina, the Jesse Stewart kind of group, one of the things that I started reading was other Appalachian writers that were writing kind of, sometimes it's called grit lit, sometimes it's called Southern Gothic or Appalachian Gothic. Writers like Ron Rash, writers like David Joy, writers, Wiley Cash, writers who had been, taking these common Appalachian stories that we've often heard about or been exposed to or know about from our times growing up and being an Appalachian, and putting a twist on them and putting some darker elements to them and putting some gritty kind of mysterious things into those stories. And that's what really got me interested in that. And so I thought if I was going to set something, in my hometown, I wanted to try that. I wanted to kind of take a common story and put a twist on it. And that's what I did. But, we just have so many wonderful, I'm just amazed at how many writers we have, not only on this panel that are doing such great work that are living from and living in and writing about Appalachia, but all the wonderful Appalachian writers that are turning out wonderful books. I mean, it is unbelievable. And not only are they turning out great books, they're winning, national and international awards, and they're bringing positive attention to Appalachia, a region that oftentimes gets overlooked and is misunderstood or gets misconstrued by the national media anytime that they're trying to do a story on Appalachia. But we've got people profiling, and showcasing the good of Appalachia and the cultural mores of Appalachia that make this such a unique place. And so that's something I've tried to do in this book with A Knife's Edge, and also that I see coming up constantly in Appalachia and in Appalachian writing from the authors that I speak with on the podcast.
Someday we'll take a side note and go have a little Kentucky bourbon, and I'll tell you about the day I spent with Jesse Stewart. One of the greatest days of my life. 17 years old again. It's what got me interested in writing. Now, I said I had something in common with everybody on this panel. Joel Burcat is a lawyer. Yes, so he's the one he and I are the two people that everybody dislike on this panel, because we're the lawyers. We're the guys that do all the legal stuff. I have to say, though, Joel's like kind of one of the smart lawyers. He does environmental law. He does works out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And here's what here's what I like about the stuff that you've done. And I'm gonna this guy, after reading, your question is going to be, like all of us lawyers, how did you go from writing like a lawyer to writing like a fiction writer? But Joel, why don't you? What are you going to give us today? What are you going to read from?
Well, it's welcome everybody, and again, thanks to Kathy Tietz and the folks at Headline Books. This is a terrific opportunity for all of us. We're all isolating at home, and being able to reach out and interact with an audience is terrific. And also being on a panel with my distinguished colleagues is terrific as well. So you're right, I am an environmental lawyer, and I've spent the last 40 years practicing environmental law, and I spent a number of years before that preparing to become an environmental lawyer. And when I wrote my first book, Drink to Every Beast, that is an environmental legal thriller. I love environmental legal thrillers, all three of them, which would be The Pelican Brief, The Appeal, and Gray's Mountain, all by John Grisham. But that's it, there aren't any others. So I thought, well, I'll have to write a few of them and see if I can't double or triple the number of books that are environmental legal thrillers. I have another book coming out in February called The Mid-Rage. This is just the arc, and the writers on this program certainly understand how important an arc is to us, because when that shows up, it's like, what a great feeling to see my arcs finally after all that work. And you still have more work. I'm proofreading my arc right now. You can see all my little tabs from the proofread. But in any event, I'm going to actually read from the book A Mid-Rage, the one that's coming out in February, because I'm very proud of this book, as I was with Drink to Every Beast, but I'm particularly proud of this book. And I think it's a really interesting story. You mentioned, and I'm on a panel, it looks like, with everybody who went to school in Kentucky, except for me. I went to Penn State, so it's not quite Kentucky, but it's the edge of Appalachia anyway. But it deals with coal mining, something near and dear to the heart of folks in Appalachia. So we're really right in the prologue of A Mid-Rage, and I'll just start right in. October 1. Ernie Renati loved the smell of sweat, urine, and fear. It signaled weakness, control, opportunity, profit. The living room before him smelled of all of that. Every stick of furniture, the cheap picture on the wall, the photo of mom, dad, and the kids, and the lamp lay askew. A single bulb burned in the lamp that leaned against the wall. The light and shadows were cast at odd angles and garishly lit some of the portions of the room. The rest was shrouded in darkness. Phyllis Stevens, had she not been visiting her mother, would have been aghast that her formerly tidy country-style living room was now in a shambles. Also, she would have been dead. "Let's do it," said Ernie. He nodded at Skell and Wolfie. They worked for Ernie, both on odd jobs like this one and at the strip mine. The men were the coldest killers Ernie knew. No sense of morals to get in the way. Followers. What was really important was that they wanted to make him happy. There was never any doubt who was the boss. Skell's work boots crunched through the shards of broken glass, from the sliding door they'd shattered when they broke into the house. He was as skinny as a skeleton, the skin of his face plastered to the bones. A jagged hockey stick-shaped scar caused his face to look crooked and made him look like a horror movie ghoul. He retrieved the plastic containers of gasoline they brought with them, and with Wolfie, splashed the gas around the living room on the rug, sofa, and furniture. "Not on the dude," Ernie said. Marty Stevens, bound with electrical cord, eyes wide, moaned from behind the duct tape that sealed his mouth. The gray hair was disheveled, the face bruised purple. Half of one ear lay on the floor. Blood oozed from the gash on his head. Tears streamed down the face. He strained against the restraints that bound him to the chair. The head shook back and forth like at a ping pong match on fast forward. "Give me that," Ernie said. He grabbed a jug from Skell. He poured a trail of gasoline from the living room to the hallway, backed up, looked at Stevens, then tossed the jug back into the living room. The men stood in the hallway. Ernie surveyed the handiwork. Killing people required finesse. Anyone could shoot or stab somebody, but a connoisseur like himself took his time, used his imagination, made it last, did the job with pride and integrity. Marty Stevens had been no match for them. Lies, though, helped. Ernie was amazed that people thought they could talk their way out of the inevitable. He relied on their capacity to believe the lies, big and small. Just tell them what they wanted to hear. Comply with us and everything will be okay. "Do it," Wolfie said. "We need to get the hell out of here." The voice seemed to come out of nowhere as his nearly black beard enveloped his face, leaving just a narrow space for his eyes and nose. His beard partially covered a large gray sweatshirt that had the Rhino Mining Company logo on it. Ernie reached into his work pants and found the cigarette lighter. He caressed it in his hand. He loved the lighter. It had been with him since Kill 1. It was a solid gold Zippo with a dragon engraved on the side. He'd taken it off the dead man. His first kill felt good, and the warmth that washed over him when he took that life came back to him every time he felt the lighter. He thumbed the flint wheel, and the flame rose 3 inches. "Inspector Stevens," Ernie said. "Can I call you Marty?" No reply. "Oh, right, the tape," Ernie said as he rolled his eyes and smiled at Skell and Wolfie. He flicked the lighter closed and stuffed it back into his pocket. Ernie ambled to the man and tore the tape from his face. It came off with a loud rip, along with skin, beard, and blood. "Help, help, for the love of God, help me," Marty said, looking toward the shattered door. "Marty, Marty, Marty, yelling isn't going to help you out here in the country. Calm down. Now I asked you nice and friendly to go with my permit. I even offered you a nice cash bonus for you or the DEP, he called it DEP, Christmas fund, if you played along. But no, you had to be some kind of Rambo, loner, self-righteous and all. "I'll do whatever you want. Please, don't do this. Please, I'm begging you. Please, please," Marty said. Tears streamed down the face. Snot and blood dripped onto the mouth. "That's a very nice request," Marty said, honestly. "If it was just me, I'd help you out. I really would. Unfortunately, we have contracts, unions, and all kinds of obligations, so your case has been turned over to the Collections Bureau. That's us. I really have no choice." The man in the chair stopped moving and his eyes locked onto the monster who was preparing to kill him. "This is what happens when you screw with me. You were told to back off, but you didn't, so this is on you." "No, no." Ernie pulled the lighter from his pocket, thumbed off the cover, and flicked the flint wheel. Then he bent over and touched the flame to the trail of gasoline. The fire dashed across the room and up the walls. "Help me, dear God, help me." The room turned yellow and orange, and the 3 criminals watched with ghoulish interest. "Now remember, boys, when you do this, you always want to leave an impression," Ernie said. Then he pointed to the door. "Move." Wolfie and Skell darted for the sliding glass door. Ernie, however, lingered for a moment, looking into the burning living room. The curtains quickly ignited and the flames climbed to the ceiling. The fire seemed to have a life of its own. The man was still seated in his chair, rocking violently back and forth, flames all around him. The face was ghastly, like that crappy painting Ernie had seen on TV. What was it? The Scream? The fire popped and acrid smoke filled the room. The place smelled of gasoline and fire and burning carpet and death. Ernie smiled coldly at Stevens, who screamed incomprehensible words. Then he sauntered to the door and his escape. I'm going to stop there and try and figure out what happens at that point. But I had a lot of fun writing this story and translating what I've learned in 40 years of practicing environmental law into this story.
Okay, so there is the question. There is the question, Joel, because you and I, as lawyers, and Dennis had a little bit of this, I think, when he started his book, as stop writing like a reporter and start writing like an author. I think we even had probably a bigger problem because we're used to write. I was a contract lawyer. I was used to writing 30-page asset purchase agreements. You are used to going to court and writing these long legal briefs on environmental law with all citations and everything else. Did you find it difficult to go from being the legal writer to being a little bit more simple in what you're writing on how you're explaining things to people, a little less lawyery, let's put it that way, a little more pedestrian? That's what I guess I would say.
Well, as you know, and as anyone can guess, writing fiction is entirely different than writing legal briefs or being a journalist or writing scientific research, whatever it might be. It's entirely different. And I actually wrote when I was in college and took a number of courses when I was in college. And then when I started practicing law, I got so busy, I just completely discontinued it until I was about 40 years old. And then I'm going to say, when I was in my early 50s, I started writing again more seriously. And I kind of had to unlearn legal writing and learn how to write fiction, because it is a very different thing. And when I look back at some of my early writing, it's very stilted and it seems legalistic. We were talking before, and one of the words that Kathy Teets, our publisher, had asked me to stop using was the word "that," which I seem to use.
We use that a lot in legal, don't we?
Right. And nobody criticizes you for doing it, but I use the word "that."
That judge wants to hear that.
So I had to, and actually, even till this day, when I think I'm totally done, I'll do a universal check and I'll do a find and search and all of that to look for the word "that." And
oh my God, I do the same thing now because I know she's going to just absolutely crucify me. She's going to ask me how many times did I use the word "that."
Right, among other words. But in any event, I'll find that I've used that word literally, a couple of hundred times unnecessarily. It's just one of those things. So there are certain things that you do as a lawyer when you're writing that's entirely different than what you do as a fiction writer.
Yeah, pick that one up in the Elements of Style after I reread it over and over again after I think the first book. So
the best rule, of course, in that is omit needless words. So
that's right. That's right. Now, as I said, I have something, by the way, but while we're doing this, before we go on to our last author, I want to make sure that everybody remembers you can get these books, autographed copies of these books for Christmas. All you have to do is go to Headline Books and they will have them available. They'll have, there we go, Dennis showing his, Dennis doing the plug up there with his books. Nothing says I love you like an autographed book from Headlines Books. That's what you want for the holidays. That's what you want to give to those who you love so well. You want to give one of our books to them. I'll plug mine real quick. Opposition Research. You'll hear about it in a future edition of the Christmas catalog that we're doing here. But I'm going to go now to Don Stansberry. And Don, okay, here's the thing that Don and I have in common is that we're the two old guys. We were talking earlier today. We were trying to figure out which one of us published first. Now, Don started out writing children's books.
Yeah,
and then
during the break, I looked it up, and the first one was 2008.
Okay, so you got me by a year. So you are now officially the dean of the Headline Books fiction department. We all bow to you, but I do say, guys, he gets a few more minutes because take a look over his right shoulder. Look over his right shoulder. There we go. He's got my first novel up on the shelf. So he's going to get a few extra minutes on the plug today that you guys didn't get. But Don did something really cool, and it's hard to do. Don went from one genre to another. Now I've done in two different genres. I've done literary fiction, which I do in first person, and I do the thrillers, which I do in third person. Don has done something totally different in that he's kind of moved from children's book to to there was a time when you did some YA writing and then the thriller writing. So I mean, Don has really progressed in what he's doing on a wide variety of topics. And so that leaves me with the question: Are we reading one of the children's books today? Are we reading the crab book? Or are we reading from one of the other books?
Crab book.
The crab book. I thought it was pretty cool. I always liked that one.
No, I thought for sure with all the distinguished members on the panel today and all the intelligence that seems to be here, I would go for an adult thriller.
Okay, we'll have to come back on the crab book then, because I really dig the crab book.
Hey,
Illustrated it himself as well.
it's kind of gone full circle because the last thing I turned into Kathy, which is supposed to be maybe 2021, is another picture book.
Oh, there you go. And by the way, if you're in Parkersburg, he is a legend in the basketball scene. So he's known in the basketball circles down there forever. So that's his background. That's where he's from. Don, go ahead and take it away and give us your read.
Okay, let me kind of give you a little bit of background on this. This one is Vulture Bend. You see there, it's another beautiful cover by Kathy. She doesn't let us do any of our own. She always does it. She always does a great job. So this is murder, mayhem, just really kind of darkness, but it also has a love story to it. I saw one a few years ago, Nicholas Sparks.
Don't they all end up being love stories, even in the darkness and everything else? It's all a love story.
It always turns out to be a love story. But I saw Nicholas Sparks at the West Virginia Book Festival. He filled up the Civic Center, and people were just dying to get to him. And I thought, that would be a good thing for me to try to do. And I'll be honest, I am completely hooked on these Hallmark Christmas movies. That's my small dog. Okay, so I just, how they're going to turn out, what's going to happen, but I'm hooked on them. So I wanted to, and I love Stephen King. So I wanted to do just a really rip out, scary book along with a love story. So the main character in this is kind of just the classic underachiever. He's kind of a smart aleck. He's never really cared about anything, and he's doing his student teaching. And it's based on you. It's kind of he's in trouble as a student teacher, so they give him as to someone as a mentor. So this is the first time he meets the mentor, who eventually becomes the another main character in this whole story. Okay, there was only one car parked in the school lot when I pulled in, a late model economy Japanese car with some kind of brown base car, about the size of a shopping cart. My car is the total opposite, 68 Chevelle, kind of loud and painted primer black. I decided to park in the adjacent lot. It was 12:15, which was good for me to only be about 15 minutes late. The snow was small and stinging, the kind that's hard to see 20 yards away, but made mountains disappear at 200 yards away. I watched the wind blow in a wispy snow wave across the white parking lot. Groups of pin oaks across the campus held their leaves indignantly, only releasing one occasionally as a sacrifice to the cutting wind. The parking lot had been plowed once already, and the curved piles, molded from the shape of the plow's blades, chunked up at the ends of the lot. The building was a glass and brick modern design with attractive landscaping. Even though it was 2 stories high, it looked low and comfortable, settled among the hills. I could see a figure moving inside the building just behind the steel and glass security doors. I hopped out, got my official looking briefcase out of the back seat, and headed toward the doors. It was January and bitterly cold, but all I could find that morning was a zippered sweatsuit top. The wind was stinging my face and making my eyes water. I started to jog. She moved to the door with a set of keys in her hands, but instead of unlocking, she stood there with a hand on her hip and looked at me through the glass. "You're late," she said, "and you're not dressed appropriately." "What?" "He said 12:30. I'm 15 minutes early." I lied. Also, there was a traffic accident. She was the opposite of what I had predicted. Green eyes and chestnut hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore trendy jeans and a nicely fitting pink sweater, the perfect girl next door. We stared at each other through the glass. She was only a couple inches shorter than me. My ears began to sting from the cold. "Your hair is a little long for student teaching. Why are you not dressed appropriately?" She sipped something that looked like hot chocolate from a mug. "Well, I didn't expect to be outside this long." "Mr. Fleshman said you're trouble," she said, taking another sip. I just got started on the wrong foot. I haven't got a feeling for this yet. I was starting to shake and she could see it. You know, we had a class together a couple of years ago, but you probably wouldn't remember. You only showed up half the time. Changed man, I said. I'm ready to teach the youth of America about, you know, stuff. I'll be happy to help you as long as you try, she said. A leaf flew across the sidewalk and over my shoes. Cross my heart, I said, and I made a little X on my chest. She still didn't move. Little gold earrings dangled just below her earlobes. She had excellent earlobes. Come on, I'm freezing out here. She waited another couple minutes and inserted the key. I stepped in and she locked the door behind me. I offered her my hand and she shook it formally. Call me Finn, I said. Annie, she said. Your hands are cold. I'm cold all over, I said. She looked me over again like she was examining a dissected science experiment. Let's go down to my classroom and you could look at my lesson plans and see if we can find something to warm you up. She started walking away. Maybe you could give me your sweater, I said. She turned with a slightly tilted head and gave me a look. I raised my hands in resignation and brought an imaginary zipper across my lips and threw it away. I got the look again, but this time there was the slightest twinkle in her eyes. I would have bet she was smiling when she turned away from me. I followed her down a series of hallways. She walked very well. She had a spark about her, a deep undercurrent of sexuality that was purposely hidden or just unannounced. I decided then that I just might enjoy the mentoring process. So that's just kind of how they started with each other. And then it kind of falls, you know, then it goes back and forth between the real killer and this guy.
So Don, my question for you is, you've run the gambit of all these different types of books. How did you make was the transition easy to go from children's books to now you're writing adult thrillers? Was when you went the whole gamut of them?
You know, for me, you know, I kind of live in both worlds because, you know, I teach fourth grade, but I live the books, you know, because I read, you know, constantly. So it's kind of easy. The part for me is how much detail do I go into? You know, I really want to make the readers try to like the main characters. I think that's the most important for me. I always go back to Indiana Jones. When I first saw those movies, I just wanted to be in the movie with those guys. I didn't want to leave the theater and go back to reality. And I think that's what I try to do in the books. I want the reader to be in the story and really like the characters and want to be with them right there in the middle of the plot. So
I think they are keeping the Arc de Triomphe in Parkersburg, so you can look in there. So I think that will work for you.
No, well, it's just whatever I can do to get these guys. How much detail, and the length of novels is a lot longer than kids' books. The crab book, Krusty.
Love Krusty. I told you I love Krusty, man.
Kathy always said there's too many words on the page. There's too many words on the page. But, I was trying to get through the story and put everything I need to. And so I tried to make it in a way that it would be, a lap book for several pages one night, and then they come back and they sit on the grandparents' lap, another several pages the next night. So it was a continuing story like that.
Well, we have everybody who've gotten through here. We have a couple minutes left. I'll switch on. Kathy, Ashley, have we gotten any questions from anybody that wants to jump on? If not, I've got a couple. So, okay, Ashley, there she is.
Yes, we have one. We have one comment. Danny Boyd says, "Hey" to Eliot. So, thank you, Danny. There. So yeah, if you've got some questions, Rick, go for it. That's all the Facebook comments that we've got. So.
I love one of the things I really enjoy finding out when I get with other authors, and Dennis and I have talked about this so many times about influences. My early influence was Jesse Stewart. Having met the man at 17 years old, I wanted to write the great coming of age novel at 17. Problem was I was 17, and I didn't come of age until 2-3 years ago, I guess it was. So, one thing that I'd like to know from each of you as you started into this process, who were your literary influences?
Well, for me, it was Stephen King. I just devoured all the Stephen King books. I think the first real book I ever read was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. And, it was the biggest book I'd ever read besides sports books. And that really set me off and think of all the detail and all the way he painted the colors. And I went through a couple years of Hemingway too, just the way he just spoke so straight to you. You know, there's no big words, nothing, just a solid, simple story.
For me, my favorite classical writer is probably John Steinbeck. I can remember coming across Of Mice and Men when I was in 8th or 9th grade, and reading everything that Steinbeck wrote. My favorite book of his, a lot of people know him for Of Mice and Men and The Grapes of Wrath, which are wonderful, but I think his best book was East of Eden. And if you haven't read that, you really should. It's Steinbeck's retelling of the Cain and Abel story from the Bible. But the way that Steinbeck could write description, and the way he could write setting, and how setting and things like the weather and things like the temperature all influenced what happened in the story and reflected the mood of his characters, was amazing. And I think Steinbeck also had this wonderful ability to create bad guys that you love to hate. Kathy Ames is the lead villainess in East of Eden. Of course, all the farm workers in The Grapes of Wrath, when Majo takes everybody out to California. Certainly the people at the work camp when George and Lenny, and Of Mice and Men, you know, they're all terrible people with bad behaviors, and they do bad things, but you can't help but be fascinated by them. And I learned a lot from Steinbeck about how to write characters, create these bad guys that readers, you know, don't like, but that they want to follow through. And then contemporary writer, my favorite writer was Pat Conroy. I mean, I just think if you want to learn how to write and write character, and he was so good at dialogue. You know, he had books with 12, 13, 14, 16 characters in some of them, and every
Eliot,
single one of his characters was.
I remember getting East of Broad when
Yes.
it came out, and I read the introductory paragraph where he is a 16-year-old with the paper route, riding up and down the streets of Charleston, throwing the newspapers out one side and out the other, and it was his homage to the city.
Yeah.
And I remember when I got that book, my wife was on the other side of that, and I threw it across the room. And she said, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "I could write for the rest of my life, and I could never write 20 pages more perfect than the introduction to East of Broad." I mean, it's just, yeah. Another story I'll tell you about the time I met him at one of the first book show I ever went to. How I met he and his wife, but delightful guy. And yes, I think the voice of at least my generation. I've got a few more grays than you. Dennis, what do you got?
I would say actually, because of my interest in journalism, my early influence was really more in the nonfiction area, particularly like the new journalists like Hunter S. Thompson, Tom Wolfe. David Halberstam was a writer I tremendously admired. I mean, his book about Vietnam, The Best and Brightest, I think is still the definitive book about what happened in Vietnam. And I remember when I was 15 years old, my first newspaper job, I convinced the editor of my local weekly to pay me 20 cents a column inch to, write high school sports, which isn't that much less than I'm getting paid to do freelance writing around here now. But it was the sports writers for some of the bigger papers that, took this kid under their wing and gave me advice, and I read their stuff. And on the fiction side, this might surprise some of you, it was science fiction. Isaac Asimov, big influence of Frank Herbert, just that whole fantasy realm. Contemporaries, I love Scott Turow. I just did a review of Michael Conley's new book. I do book reviews for booktrib.com. And if you want to read a book by someone who knows how to craft a plot like a Swiss watch, then, you need to read Michael Conley. If we write, anybody writing a procedural has to kind of bow in respect for Michael Conley. But those are some of the influences I've had.
Joel, how about you?
I was very fortunate growing up. I was friendly with a group of nerdy kids, and we read like crazy. So we read all kinds of books in junior high school. And I remember reading Catch-22 and Steinbeck and Hemingway. And this was not what we were assigned to do. This is just, we competed to see who could read the most books. And so I read a lot of books when I was young and all the way through my life. I think the writer that has most impacted me, though, is Philip Roth. And the reason I really liked Philip Roth was he showed us as writers what we had to do to be able to totally disassociate ourselves from our writing and be able to put on paper the things that we needed to put on paper in order to really tell an effective story. I didn't always like Philip Roth's stories, but I admired what he did, and I thought that what he did showed us as writers what we had to do to be able to really tell a story. I would say in terms of thrillers, the first thriller writer was really a crime thriller writer that I loved, and I read all of his books, with Mario Puzo, who wrote The Godfather. Well, he rewrote The Godfather about 15 times, and you know, he had a number of different books about the mafia, quite a few books about the mafia, and I read every single one. I remember when I was disappointed when I read the last one, because there were no more, and he passed away a number of years ago now, and so that was it. But I remember reading his books and just loving his stories, and he told such great stories. So, I mean, those were I would say those are two of my influences. I mean, there are other things that I read that have absolutely nothing to do with thrillers. Cormac McCarthy, who just can write an unbelievable story. He tells a story like no one else can, and tells such different stories, you know, everything from All the Pretty Horses to The Road. I mean, unbelievable stories that come out of this man's mind. Just really a terrific writer. So a lot of influences, but I would say those would be Mario Puzo and Philip Roth would be two of the ones who really influenced me as a writer.
Puzo, I have the copy of The Godfather. I have notes that I have written as I've read through it, my own thoughts about what were happening. My copy of the Godfather is so marked up, has so many notes, has so many everything else in it. And you're right, it's just a brilliant book. Although you'd have to go to the new copy of The Godfather to figure out why Luca Brasi was the most feared man in all of New York. Thank you very much for
If I can jump in, I was just going to say this might be the best political thriller ever written, Advise and Consent by Alan Drury. You just sparked that in my head. It holds up decades later if you like political thrillers. And I think that influenced me quite a bit. Sorry.
That's okay. As we have to do here, we're at the end of the hour. We want to thank everybody for being with us. Don, Eliot, Joel, Dennis, thank you all for being with us. Next time we get together for a live event, all of us will bring our guitars and our mandolins, as we often do when we go someplace, and take up a little bit of music. But Dennis, you going to take us out? Is that what you're going to do here? You're going to unmute us and take us out here? Remember, you can get your books here, Headline Books. Just go to headlinebooks.com and you can pick up copies, autographed copies in particular, of the books that we talked about today. What are you going to do, Willen? Is that what you're going to do there as we go out here? Not really a Christmas song, but thank you all very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Headline Books, zoom into books, get a copy. Nothing says I love you at Christmas and Hanukkah like an autographed Headline Books thriller. Thanks for being with us.